Hello everybody, and welcome to the supercut of the signs iceberg with over 100 terrifying signs. I won't talk for very long because I'm sure you're excited to just, see signs, but just a quick reminder, this video is parts 1 through 3 of the Iceberg series that I made, and at the end there are 5 new signs that I've never covered before. Now these iceberg videos were actually sort of 3 separate icebergs, not really 3 parts of one iceberg like you might see in a typical iceberg series. So to make it less confusing, I've just eliminated any references to the iceberg chart format at all. There are no tiers of the iceberg or anything like that. Just pure signs for your entertainment, or maybe to help you go to sleep or something. I will say though, before we begin, that I got new information on one really cool sign, but I won't tell you what it is, you'll have to watch for yourself. But someone who actually visited the location in question solved a little mystery for us, so I hope you enjoy that. Anyway, I will quit yapping, let's go ahead and begin with the first of 102 signs to cover today. Prevent your death. This is one of the signs that sort of kicked off this whole thing, in my opinion. It was one of the first creepy signs I saw, making the rounds on the internet a long time ago, and it's actually pinned on r/scary signs. So this one takes the cake for being at least one of the original creepy signs that spooked people. Most of the reports of it though come from the Eagle's Nest sinkhole in Florida, where as of 2016, 10 people had died during cave diving. There's another one located in Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula, which is possibly even creepier because of the current system there. The Yucatan is basically a giant, unexplorable cave system filled with rapid water, and though humans have never been into 90% of it, it still claims the lives of divers every year. Percy Priest Lake. This sign can be found at Percy Priest Lake around Nashville, Tennessee. Now, I've seen pictures of this sign a couple different times in its life cycle, with the number being as high as 171 dead from drowning. That might seem like an unbelievable number until you look at just how large this lake is, literally crossing over 2 counties. I think the scariest part of this one is how easily it is to see that it's been modified. Like, these removable numbers are fairly obvious, and it seems like it's someone's job to change this at least every couple of months. So what is it that makes this lake so dangerous? And why are some sources even reporting that the number of deaths are increasing every year? Well, oddly enough, it actually has to do with how the lake was designed. First off, it is almost entirely man-made, with various purposes, including a hydroelectric dam, but it was mainly intended to prevent flooding in the area and retain quality water during periods of drought. However, those who made it had fishing in mind. So when they actually made the dam, they left the bottom full of trees to support fish habitats. So many of these drownings involve people getting ensnared down there, people who might have otherwise been able to escape. Now, as there often is with boating accidents, alcohol is frequently involved. But it is just an insanely creepy thought. The idea of people maybe thinking they're a strong swimmer, and getting knocked in or falling down or whatnot, but getting trapped in roots and tree systems, stuck in the dark, until eventually, you just drown. Deja vu area. Okay, I'll say this right off the bat, these signs are fake. Sorry. There are no actual deja vu anomalies that the government or transit authorities try and warn you about. These are fun signs which I would consider art pieces. I know that isn't the focus of this iceberg, but I liked these ones so much in particular, and they're pretty well known that I just had to put them on the early tier of the iceberg. They're pretty creative in and of themselves, and certainly eye-catching. I mean, if I saw these on the subway, I would definitely be very confused. But there's also a little debate about what they're actually from. First off, we know that there are different versions of these signs. When you first saw them, your mind might have immediately thought about the SCP community, and you'd be spot on. Some of these explicitly have an SCP-related logo, but the most frequently passed around photo that I see have some version of the MTA logo, or the Metropolitan Transit Authority, basically the New York subway. I believe someone at some point did put these on New York subways, and they were later appropriated as SCP content. Another thing people got confused with is the game Control, with tons of people saying this was inspired by the game or an outright screenshot of it, to which other players replied they had never seen such a thing. At the end of the day, this was a prank or piece of art that turned into something fun to appreciate, which is all we can ask for, so in that regard, there probably won't be a perfectly clear-cut explanation of who made it or how many versions actually made it onto the real subway system, but it is kind of fun. I have to wonder what on earth would cause something like that, even in an SCP story, like if it would be a gas leak or some entity or whatnot. No cure. This sign is attached to the back of a small cargo truck where this photo was snapped of it a few years ago. Since then, it's made the rounds on the internet creeping people out. The thing is, this is almost certainly just a goofy sticker that somebody put up. First of all, I'd like to imagine that the US government wouldn't be driving Ebola through like a town with a Waffle House or something, but beyond that, the Yamaha and motorcycle sticker lends me to believe that this is just a guy's toy trailer, and that there's either a motorcycle or maybe a four-wheeler or something back there. It's kind of an ingenious idea to put on the back of your trailer. I mean, sure, it's not the most convincing thing ever, but you could slap one on for good measure, and it's certainly enough to make the local meth head who might steal a motorcycle at least think twice about breaking in. White Mountain Trail Sign. You can encounter these signs scattered about White Mountain National Forest, which read, "Stop. The area ahead has the worst weather in America. Many have died there from exposure, even in the summer. Turn back now if the weather is bad." Now, the way they write this, to me, makes it sound a lot different than regular signs that warn about exposure. I mean, there's plenty of trail signs that might tell you about rising water levels or heat stroke or something like that, but there's just something different about the way this one was written. Surely it can't be the worst weather in America, right? The National Forest, located in New Hampshire and Maine, though beautiful, is one of the windiest and coldest places in the country. Specifically, an area called the Presidential Range has been home to over 175 recorded fatalities since the mid-19th century. The New Hampshire Game and Fish Department conducts an estimated 200 rescue operations there a year. The main danger is the wind. In fact, the highest wind speed ever recorded outside of a cyclone occurred here. Air is basically forced upwards over the mountain and then squeezed through a small gap near the top, which makes it accelerate to great speeds. Not only that, but the weather is extremely unpredictable, with frequent snowstorms pummeling the area. On the whole, the specific mountain range is consistently pointed to as one of the most dangerous in the world, so this sign is in no way an exaggeration. Prison hitchhikers. This is actually a somewhat common sign in America. They are frequently posted around the exits or highways around prisons. These signs advise people to not pick up hitchhikers as they may be escaped prisoners. Of course, it's not the 1970s, and I'm not sure Americans are really picking up this many hitchhikers anymore, but I suppose if you were going to do it, you wouldn't want to do it around a prison. Now, there are actually a couple thousand prison escapes every year in the US. Usually guys who just walk away from work assignments or other low security incidents. So it is within the realm of possibility that there are hitchhikers in these areas. But I couldn't find any cases of this specific type of thing happening recently. There does exist this funny video of a prison escapee convincing a cop that he was just out jogging, so I guess if they're charismatic enough, they might get away with it. Emergency siren. This sign can be found around the Salem nuclear plant in Salem County, New Jersey. Though this isn't the only emergency alert system that tells people to turn on their radios and listen for more information, I found this one just particularly interesting. Maybe just how simple it is. There's no urgent message to evacuate, no clues as to what the issue might be, besides of course the small radioactivity symbol in the corner. That and the sign being placed in what we can at least see in the picture to be a normal community with houses and such just makes it stand out as a bit creepy. Lava Falls. At the Lava Falls route in the Grand Canyon, one can find this little message. It reads, "Are you fit and adventurous? You fit the profile of 3 deaths within a year and endless injuries. Most heat-related deaths occur not far from this sign, 15 minutes from the top. If you choose to continue, please consider and accept the significant chance of death or serious injury and the burden it places on others. If you encounter heat-related troubles, headache, leg cramps, nausea, vomiting, return to the river and with your clothes on, completely immerse yourself. Rest in the shade, hydrate with river water, eat, and wait until dark or the following morning to exit. This could save your life." 3 deaths a year on one trail is an insane number, and the suggestion that being athletic and adventurous, maybe a bit experienced, isn't enough to save you is just creepy. Also, the need to immerse yourself completely just feels so strange. I mean, it makes sense, but it also sounds like you're hiding from a monster or something. Or maybe I've just been reading too much SCP stuff. The Lava Falls Trail is a very strenuous hike with common hazards, but on top of that, there's a major danger of flash flooding here. So maybe laying down in the water isn't a fantastic idea either. Wall or ceiling? At first, it's hard to believe this is a real sign. This odd warning seems a lot more in line with the déjà vu ones mentioned earlier, in that, surely, this is some SCP parody, trap for schizophrenics, or a warning to workers in some strange facility crawling with monsters. But no, this is very much real. This sign comes from a hospital, which means, more likely than not, it's referring to the pneumatic tube system that runs through the walls. Pneumatic tubes, for those of you that don't know, are those things at the drive-up ATMs that you're supposed to put bees inside of. In hospitals, these are used for sending around specimens and drugs, which, when you think about it, is a phenomenally efficient idea. What makes this even more likely is that the poster refers you to the on-call engineer, because what this sign is really talking about is items that are stuck in the walls. Things in the tube that got stuck on something but are still being pulled and thus make noise. But the presentation is just a bit weird. I mean, they kind of set themselves up to look a bit creepy. With that explanation, it's not strange at all, but still they could have just put on their, pneumatic tubes in use. Also, guys, congratulations, you've made it to the mystery update in today's video. So, Nathan reached out to me on Instagram. By the way, I have an Instagram if you'd like to follow it, as well as a TikTok if you're active there. I make reels with individual Iceberg entries, but I also will post updates and stuff on there. And if there ever was anything wrong with the channel, I would explain it there. So, yeah. Nathan showed me a picture of the sign saying it's from his local hospital. These are not actually made of pneumatic tubing, although I do maintain that that was a pretty good guess. This sign actually refers to the supporting beams of the ceiling. They are made of autoclaved aerated concrete, which is essentially concrete that comes pre-mixed and built in little segments at a factory, and is then transported to the construction site. While energy efficient and maybe cheaper, they are brittle and can experience shrinkage cracks. The reason this sign exists at all is because if you did hear a sound in the wall or ceiling, it might indicate that the roof is near collapse. Anyway, that's just a little update I wanted to provide. Now you know a little bit more about construction materials in English hospitals. Back to the video. IRA signs. There were several different propaganda signs used by the IRA during the Troubles, which, regardless of the nature of the conflict, are amazing pieces of propaganda. First, there was this "Beware of Falling Helicopters" sign. To my knowledge, a few of these were put up by the IRA after they managed to shoot down a few British helicopters. You see, the IRA had this strategy of using truck-mounted machine guns to, at best, take down helicopters, or otherwise keep them out of or channel them through specific places. There is actually some footage of this happening. After one of these kills, presumably as a celebratory/propaganda effort, they put up these signs. There's also another one which has a very interesting story behind it. Sniper units in the IRA were a very effective tool. In fact, it was noted that there were disciplinary issues among some British units who, in fear of these snipers, would remain in hiding while under orders to check cars for bombs. These sniper at work signs were put up in areas like this, much in the style of the helicopter ones. Funnily enough, after the Good Friday Agreement and the units stopping their fighting, some of the signs remained, but were changed to say sniper on hold or job seeking. The drowning machine. You might have seen some sort of contraption like this before. This barrier is called a weir, and it's built to change the height of a water level downstream. They're often used for ponds, reservoirs, and the like, and come in a myriad of different forms. They're very common devices to see around waterways, and you probably have one very close to you. However, a variation of the weir is one built mostly underwater. These submerged weirs are extremely dangerous. This little diagram shows just what happens, where the water is essentially forced into a circular motion and picks up speed. It is, in effect, physically impossible to escape in an underwater weir, leading to the nickname, the drowning machine. There are several signs from around the world showing the drown machine, a nickname probably born out of the dire need to communicate just how awful these things can be. Weir waters often look extremely calm, like in these photos right here. So they're inherently deceptive. So if these designs are so dangerous, why do they exist? Well, the thing is, underwater weirs, sometimes called hidden dams, were and in some ways still are absolute powerhouses across America, Canada, and some other countries. They're extremely useful, providing energy, running grain mills, and stopping droughts. They're also very cheap to produce, which, while sounding enticing, meant that thousands were built across America and Canada to the point where we don't even have a national database of where each one is. Furthermore, it can cost millions of dollars to remove or renovate these dams, and while some states help communities finance these procedures, it's difficult to spur the political momentum needed for such a big project. An article from 2015 cited a BYU study which stated that at least 441 people have died in these hidden dams in the US since the 1950s, with over a third of those deaths happening after 2000. It was hypothesized that as more states and cities funded tourism efforts, waters that were once just frequented by fishermen are now visited by kayakers and swimmers, sometimes folks from out of town who just aren't aware of the dangers. These machines are like little black holes. Once you get in, you just can't get out. Stinging tree. If the man-eating bugs and other animals in Australia weren't enough for you, don't worry, the trees want to kill you too. This sign, which refers to the dead Drosonide moroides, also known as stinging trees, reads, "Beware stinging tree. Visitors are advised to beware the stinging tree. Contact can cause severe pain and distress. If stung, seek immediate medical attention. Dial 000. What's particularly interesting about this sign is that it's not just a polite warning to unsuspecting tourists, but it literally says to call emergency services right away if you just happen to touch it. The pain from the stinging tree is so bad that allegedly, on a few occasions, it has driven people to take their own lives. Supposedly, one man accidentally used it as toilet paper and ended up shooting himself over the pain. The suffering can last weeks or months. Sleep might be nearly impossible for up to days after the sting. People end up swollen or covered in hives. To be honest, I don't actually think the sign sells it well enough. I really do not want to touch that thing. Live bombs. Bombs from World War II showing up in the present day are not an uncommon sight for Europeans. While living in the UK, I actually had a train delay because a bomb was found on the tracks. But for Americans, with there being no combat on our continent, except for the infamous boat touching incident, it's not something we're used to at all. That's what makes these signs throughout areas in West Virginia just so strange. I've actually seen some of these personally while hiking with my family. During World War II, the Dolly Sods Wilderness in West Virginia was used for mortar and artillery practice because the mountainous terrain was similar enough to Italy to provide good training for servicemen. Naturally, however, while shooting rockets into the woods, many are bound not to explode and lie dormant for years. That's where these signs come in, warning you to please not touch the explosive lodged into the ground. These things have actually injured people. One man described finding a mortar round while hiking, and as one does, picked it up, played with it, and once finished, tossed it onto the ground, at which point it exploded and threw him into a tree. Covered in phosphorus burns and lodged with shrapnel, he managed to splint his leg with a rifle and make his way to safety. There are ongoing efforts to clean these things up, but it's that sort of thing where there will always exist some sort of danger. They're not something I'd want to see in the woods, by any means. Lava bench. This sign is one of my favorites on the list, pretty much because it's fallen victim to the thing it's warning you about. It's a bit like seeing a sign that says beware of sharks, and it having a suspiciously shark mouth shaped bite taken out of it. A lava bench is a phenomenon where lava builds up at the edge of the ocean, sort of being the barrier between water and volcano. As you can imagine, these are very unstable and quickly collapse into the water. This sign, from Big Island, Hawaii, advertises this danger quite effectively. The sign itself has been burned like this since at least 2005 and is a bit of a tourist attraction now. It lies on what used to be a paved road that was destroyed by volcanic activity. Do not ski alone. This sign from Killington Ski Resort is quite chilling, no pun intended. It's not the most gripping warning at all, but it is a bit, solemn. Skiing is one of those activities where you should always let people know where you're going, especially if it's off trail, because when you get lost or buried or injured or trapped or whatever, it's almost impossible to find you. The man pictured here just looks to me as almost, defeated. Like he's lost and has just decided to find a good spot to sit it out and wait until he dies. I think it's a compelling warning, and honestly one that I'd take seriously if I saw out in the woods. Fire danger. There are obviously lots of different signs that talk about the danger of wildfires, usually with sliders that one can manually point to like this. I think this one is the absolute creepiest though, where it says catastrophic. It's especially creepy when you consider just how fast forest fires can move, especially in Australia where this photo is from. It's also creepy how, at least in this picture, there's such a danger, but from the angle we've got, you can't see anything. Like this giant fire is going to sneak up on you from behind, which they actually can. While I was looking for this picture, I saw this post on the Creepy Fire subreddit which showed an alert from Australia about one of these fires, which is so much creepier than the sign itself. Part of it reads, "It's too late to leave." Absolutely terrifying. I have to imagine if you ran into a catastrophic level on this sign, you wouldn't be able to get out either, and you'd just have to wait it out in your house. Wear a mask. There were lots of creepy things that came out of the Chinese COVID lockdowns, be it people welded into their own homes or drones with loudspeakers telling you to control your desire to be free. One of the creepier pictures from that time period is right here, this giant LED sign on the side of a building, which warns people to wear a mask. There's nothing particularly creepy about the rhetoric itself, just how dystopian the whole thing looks. The massive building shrouded in pollution, looking as if it's pulled straight from Blade Runner. Caution exotic animals. This sign is pulled from an incident that I actually talked about in my Appalachia Iceberg. For anyone not from America, these signs are extremely common on highways and the sides of roads, usually used during construction to give information about adjusted routes or speed limits or whatnot. They don't usually talk about, local wildlife. However, these photos right here were taken on October 18th, 2011 in Zanesville, Ohio, where a total of 50 exotic animals were released from someone's farm. Terry Thompson, a Vietnam vet and exotic animal handler and collector, had in his possession Bengal tigers, black and brown bears, wolves, a baboon, a monkey, mountain lions, and 17 African lions. I won't detail the entire escape because I did it in a different video, but I wanted to point out these signs from that night. Nobody actually got hurt, but people did have close-up encounters with these animals, and it absolutely could have been much worse. I mean, there were literally lions and a monkey which potentially had hepatitis running around. Just a very strange thing, I suppose. Deadly manure. I don't often think about manure being dangerous, but like anything that contains methane or similar gases, it is extremely deadly. Your brain isn't very good at registering if you're not breathing oxygen. If you're breathing carbon dioxide, you'll have a minimal reaction, but a lot of other gases you just can't recognize. Breathing in these gases will kill you very, very quickly, as this sign so eloquently points out. I actually think this sign, message aside, is a very good depiction of what happens. I have symbolism and semiotics on the mind after making an iceberg about nuclear semiotics, that thing where you have to communicate nuclear waste to future generations. And I honestly think this drawing really shows just how dangerous these unseen killers can be. Do you know where the bears are? This sign from a wildlife park in Doncaster is from a polar bear enclosure. It's a message to the staff for after-hours procedures, but the way it's written is just so creepy. I suppose with context it isn't that bad, but running into a sign which asks you that is just so odd. It's not a forceful, concise warning like many on this list. It's just a question, which I think makes it so much more intriguing and creepy. It might not be an indicator of danger, just a reminder for whatever procedures the animal handlers have going on there. But the simple question is just, an odd way to frame things, and at first glance, is pretty spooky. Waving children. This sign from a town in the Philippines defies explanation to this day. Obviously, there's nothing creepy about waving to kids, but this gives a Children of the Corn vibe. The first photo of this sign was posted in 2006, so it has been there quite a while. And if it were intended to be a practical joke, it was put up before a lot of people were on the internet and this sort of thing was popular, so I don't know, maybe that's a possibility. It's on a road heading towards a national park, which supposedly has some nearby elementary schools. Some people suggested it might be a sign designed to get people to slow down, or at least pay mind to the fact that there could be kids crossing the road, and the message just became creepy through some sort of language and culture barrier. It would also make sense that the sign would be in English if there's tourists in the area because of, the national park. There is a lot of superstition in the Philippines though, and they have a lot of their own fascinating lore and cryptids, so I don't know, maybe there's a cooler explanation to be had about some sort of monster warning. Warning. We've covered a lot of warning signs today, but this one might be the freakiest yet. This depiction of a person having a really bad day shows them inhaling welding fumes. When welding, a mixture of different gases results from melting metal, and these are extremely dangerous to ingest. Oftentimes, welders develop lung cancer over long periods of time, but there's also immediate danger too, apparently of this exploding goo. Never open this door. So this is a really weird category of signs that I've stumbled upon recently, one that just really confused me. These things look like something you put outside of a zombie lab, not like a freaking Taco Bell. These signs are frequently put on the back doors of different fast food places. Apparently, this is to warn you of the major dangers of using the back door at night, because robbers will target that point of entrance towards the end of a shift to get the cash from the day. Scrolling through comments on Reddit about these, there are some anecdotes of people who either experienced robberies working at a place like this or otherwise heard about something like that happening. It's supposed to remind people to use the front door if they're taking out garbage, denying a potential assailant the easy access of the back door. There's a couple variations of this, but this yellow square one with room for a window in the middle is really popular. Please don't kill us. This is an absolute oddball. These signs are used in construction sites in South Africa because of the high number of accidents in the country. Apparently, South Africans are pretty crazy drivers. They switched from these typical reduced speed signs to this one right here to better grab the attention of drivers. And hey, we're talking about it, so it must have worked, right? Falling deer. I probably worry about a couple things on any given day. One thing I do not worry about, however, is having a half-eaten mass of deer flesh fall on top of me. This sign is a warning to beware of falling deer parts, as leopards can seal their meat high up in trees. While that is a real fact, and potentially danger, this sign is sort of fake. Well, it's a real sign, certainly, but it's part of a zoo exhibit in Pittsburgh, specifically the leopard exhibit. Personally, I would be much more worried about the leopard than the carcass. It looks pretty creepy, though, at first glance. Crying is not an emergency. This is another one of those classic creepy signs that you've probably seen before, even if you're not a fan of the trend. There's actually a ton of signs like this, used at parks all over the world. And it's sort of a logical thing. Like, it's a major effort to stop and restart a big slide or ride or whatever, and I get that you can't just do it because a kid gets scared. But this one in particular with Goofy is just so creepy. I don't know, like the Goofy is just so unnecessary right here. It looks like something out of Five Nights at Freddy's, or I don't really know, honestly. Border Patrol signs. In the hot deserts in and around the US-Mexico border, there exist these rescue beacons, places designed for crossers to rest and seek help if they're severely dehydrated or hot. The sign explains that if you're moving on foot, you're in danger of just being here, be it the heat or dehydration or getting lost, or not being able to navigate. In some of these photos, you can actually see that it's so hot that the paint has completely stripped off one side of these poles. It isn't the message, though, that I find creepy about these signs. It's the drawings. Throughout this video, we've seen some drawings of stick people and some that put a spin on the typical stick people you see in signs and go above and beyond, at least slightly, but still convey simple, concise messages. This one here, though, is very creepy. I don't think I've ever seen a stick figure show just so much anguish. Well, maybe this guy was worse, but this dude here looks absolutely cooked. The slumped over posture, the outstretched hands, it really does look like he has heat stroke or something, and communicates the fear through a language barrier. I think with that visual, you'd accurately understand the problem, and by that point, you'd probably be experiencing it yourself, and you'd be more likely to push the button to get help. Coupled with the rest of the things in this picture, it's all just very unsettling. Do not dig. I already mentioned nuclear semiotics once, but you guys know since I'm a big fan of it, I'd have to mention it again here. There are plenty of nuclear waste disposal sites around the world, but very few that you're easily allowed to access and just walk around. One spot in the USA is open to the public, presumably in a park or something, where you can find this message. Caution, do not dig. Buried in this area is radioactive material from nuclear research conducted here, 1943 to 1949. Burial area is marked by 6 corner markers 100 feet from this center point. There is no danger to visitors. U.S. Department of Energy, 1978. There's a couple things that were always unsettling about this to me. First off, the sign just looks like a tombstone, and it's more than a typical warning sign. It just feels like you need to seriously heed the warning. The permanence of it, being a bigger object than just a normal screwed-on sign, I guess, just looks different. Also, the simplicity of the explanation, while also saying exactly where this stuff is marked, is creepy. Like, they're not doing this for fun. There is an explicit danger. This is precisely where it is. Do not touch it. This certainly will not be the last nuclear waste warning project to be constructed, and there are a few others that exist, but I just thought this one right here was worth including. These plants can kill. To end this iceberg, I wanted to include these signs right here, which can be found at the Aldwych Garden. These gardens have existed since the 1700s, and are now a place you can go tour. What separates this from typical garden visits in the UK, however, is the fact that this place contains all sorts of plants that are illegal to grow elsewhere, making up the poison garden. This is what most people tend to visit, to see hemlock, poppy, weed, foxglove, or whatever. So it's a bit of a tourist attraction, but it's also a legitimate warning to people messing around. On several occasions, people have broken into the gardens to try and steal the weed or whatever from there. If you don't know what you're doing, and I venture to suggest that people breaking into places at night to steal drugs might not, you could easily get sick or deadly ill from messing around with the wrong plants. However, I do think, primarily, the point of these signs is for the aesthetic. They are still creepy. Death Railroad. We're starting off the first tier with the Death Railroad sign, suggested by Wasatch Wind. The Death Railroad sign is officially known as the Billups Neon Crossing Signal. Created by Alonzo Billups in the mid-1930s, the sign was a direct result of an epidemic of cars crashing into trains at railroad crossings. Unlike most railroad crossing signs, Alonzo's design sported a gantry, which is basically the design of sign that goes over the road in a U shape, like a highway sign. If a train were actually approaching, the words "Stop, Death, Stop" would flash in blue and red neon. On top of that, a freaking air raid siren would go off. Below that message were normal railroad lights. So right here you've got like a triple gut punch of effectiveness. Only one of these were ever installed in Grenada, Mississippi. There's a few reasons why this design never really caught on, besides just the fact that it's insanely over the top. The first is that, when World War II started, there were shortages of neon. Also, occasionally, the air raid siren attached to it would just start ringing, even if no train was present, and it would not stop until crews arrived to fix it. Eventually, this thing wore down and they just put normal railroad tracks in front of it, and then removed the whole thing in the 1970s. This is impractical as all get out, but it would literally have to capture your attention. Hey, people still fail to heed railroad warnings, so maybe we need to bring this thing back. Funny enough, Lionel made a toy model of this thing, which I find kind of funny. Minen. So in the first video, we did bring up signs about hidden mines or explosives, and I talked about how in the USA this is super rare, but for Europeans, it's potentially a daily occurrence. This sign here comes from Germany, so not quite as rare as the ones in the US. This user mentioned hiking in a park near the border between the old East and West Germany, and of course there are a few designs, and I'm not sure which one they were specifically talking about, but I found all of these pretty creepy. Obviously the skull is a bit of a cool addition, but I really liked these hand-painted ones. They've got that font that makes it look like it's coming from an old book of fairy tales, except instead of talking about fairies and goblins and stuff, it's hidden explosives. Anyway, there are a lot of these, and they all have slightly different designs, which I find kind of fun. Blood Alley. On Missouri Highway 21, there exists a 28-mile stretch of highway known infamously as Blood Alley. It's full of intersections, curves, and frequently only has 2 lanes, leading to a massively disproportionate amount of crashes, and therefore deaths, in this area, compared to typical state highways. But of course, we're not here to talk about just that. We're here to talk about the sign. There are a couple of these signs which can be found in Blood Alley that were brought to my attention by Nigh Temptation. These signs are a bit more creative than your typical road signs, and they're also massive. Residents in this area complain all the time about the car crashes. There's actually a recent example of a car flying off the highway into a nearby apartment complex. It just seems like such a ridiculous danger if you're not from the area and aren't prepared for what's coming. The sign itself is not official. I can't find exactly who put it up. Information seems to be a bit hard to find, but you might have guessed it was somewhat of a protest in and of itself. The note on the bottom, which reads, "Progress as promised," is criticizing the state government for failing to fix the road. It's been a point of contention for years. It's not like the government doesn't recognize the problem, but they've consistently failed to meet budget requirements, and though they've made some improvements, haven't yet completely rebuilt it and fixed it to an appropriate standard. Anyway, I do hope that it gets repaired in the near future. It's in a pretty beautiful area, and it seems like a nice community that doesn't deserve absolute piss missiles flying into their buildings. Slow, death in the family. A sign pointed out to me by Jacob O'Leary is this one, common to the southern USA. Seeing this really surprised me because even though I can tell this is an American sign, and I've lived in the South and seen funerals going by, I've never actually seen this in real life. For any non-American viewers, though I do think this is somewhat common globally, when there's a funeral procession in the US, they often stick a siren on your car and let everyone skip traffic and have people stop for you as if they were an emergency vehicle. So this sort of seems like a courtesy sign letting you know that's about to happen, or maybe a warning that a funeral is actually going on, which might indicate there's an unusual amount of traffic in the area. I haven't explicitly confirmed this, but I'm nearly 100% positive these signs are owned by funeral homes who put them out themselves as a courtesy, and not necessarily the local government. Other sources say that funeral homes put these by the houses of people who have recently suffered a loss, for a few days maybe, so as to encourage drivers not to honk or somehow disturb them. Generally, it seems like this is more of a service offered by funeral homes and is more common in Alabama or otherwise rural parts of the US. I think that's why these are a tad off-putting. They're just really rare, and it's also odd to see that official government typeface on a sign referring to one family. I'm not sure, I can't quite put a pin on it. It's intended to be an object of kindness, to help a grieving family. But it just seems odd to me personally. Another idea I came up with just now recording this is that it might indicate that there's a lot of little kids and really old people because, funerals often bring those two groups together. So, I don't know, if I knew there were a bunch of little kids and elderly people who might not be able to look out for themselves, I would want to slow down a bit, but I don't know, it's just, it's strange. Aerated water. We briefly discussed the dangers of dams and still water in the previous video, but here I want to specifically focus on these aerated water signs. These were brought to my attention by Malomart and Hardtack 15. To preface, aerated water is water which has had air added to it somehow. Occasionally naturally, but almost always because it's involved in some sort of contraption. This can be done in the form of bubbling, spraying, or mixing, and is done for all sorts of purposes from improving water quality by removing minerals to making carbonated drinks. However, in lots of circumstances, this aerated water keeps those particles, or things they're trying to remove from safe water. So those particulates, combined with the concentration of air bubbles, increase the water's density so that you don't naturally float. On top of that, since machinery is involved, there could be traps forming or moving parts that otherwise make these things horrible places to swim. Could you get out? Yes, but will the water naturally work in your favor by letting you float? No. And that is why these signs are so creepy. It's a rarely encountered danger, and these signs very bluntly tell you that you can die. On top of that, there's a particularly direct message in some of these, literally saying, "You will not float." I just watched It 2 and the new It show, so that comment reminded me of that, but anyway, I just found these very odd. You absolutely will not float in aerated water. Somehow, aerated water made its way onto TikTok, where people, show aerated water and then put that awful "those who know" meme on it. I think it originally came from the Urbex community, but I'm not sure. So, funnily enough, I feel like average people have no idea what aerated water is, but 9 to 12-year-olds do. I think that's kind of funny. Fatal Accidents section. Much like the stretch of highway in Missouri we discussed, there are tons of signs all over the world dedicated to particularly dangerous corridors on the road. This user, who I'm assuming is Czech based off their name, and that I found the exact sign they were talking about, mentioned a sign which shows exactly that. This sign, with two depictions of the Grim Reaper holding what looks like a scimitar, is an official sign in the Czech Republic which is used to denote these potentially dangerous areas. The message reads, "Attention, section of fatal accidents." There's also a similar design with slightly different reapers. This one isn't too out of the ordinary, but it would definitely capture my attention if I were driving by. Come home alive. Hal from Tartary mentioned a sign near Lightning Ridge, New South Wales, an outback town in Australia, which just read, "Come back alive." Now, I can't find a sign with the exact wording they used, but I'm nearly sure any of these I'm showing could be what they saw. There are lots of signs in the Australian outback that can be really off-putting, because they emphasize just how vast and empty these areas are, and how difficult it is for help to arrive. There are a bunch of these signs which say, "Please arrive alive," which is what I think he was talking about. There are also some like this one here, which literally just show an empty road and an infinite expanse, asking if you know how long it would take for help to come. I honestly appreciate this messaging. I'm not Australian, but I'm sure lots of tourists head out for road trips in the outback with no water and stuff, and these messages hopefully convince them to maybe turn around and get supplies, or at least tell others where they are going. Technical only. The technical only sign brought to my attention by Simply Leaf is a pretty interesting one. These signs can be found at Crestone Needle in Colorado. What they mean by technical only, and I had to look this up, is that the specific climbing route needs to be followed to the T, as stepping off of it, even for just a bit, can land you in a treacherous situation with cliffs that are impossible to get out of. Just looking at a few pictures of this spot, I absolutely understand why. It doesn't look like a horrible climb, but these jagged edges are just brutal. I think what I found off-putting about these signs is that they seem to speak to the advanced climber, a warning for the fit and adventurous per se. It's a sign for people who already did the easy stuff, brought sunscreen, water, a map. It's meant to tell you that even if you do know what you're doing, veering off the path is a very bad idea. Also, people do die here all the time, and it makes sense that at least some of those deaths could be attributed to people leaving the route. Sand Dune Rescue. This entry was suggested by Martha Anastasia and comes from the many sand dunes in Michigan. A ton of people, naturally, walk or slide down these dunes for fun and then can't get back up. You might wonder why they can't do that until you see an image of some of them from the backside, and it makes a little bit more sense. As some people have pointed out on this post here, a ton of these dunes are long walks from the parking lot, upwards of 30 minutes in some cases. So if you're coming out here for fun in the summertime and then get stuck and start to make your way up, you're potentially already really dehydrated and worn out from earlier in the day. There are a couple of variations of this sign, and the funniest to me are the ones which emphasize the rescue cost being $3,000. I guess the government got tired of fishing people out of the water. Here's a shot from Google Maps showing the bottom. I mean, I don't know about you guys, this looks like a ton of fun and I would absolutely love to sled down that, but I'm also 22 years old and pretty fit. I could maybe do it a few times. I can imagine coming down here with your kids or whatever, and if you're not prepared, literally passing out on the way back up. It's things like this that I think people really underestimate the severity of, because it just looks really fun. But yeah, I wanted to share this one with you guys. Sandstorm. In the vein of sand, we're going to talk about these sandstorm signs. I got the idea for this entry from this user, who mentions seeing some out in Arizona. There are a ton of these, and I'll just show a couple. I think I finally figured out why these signs bother me so much. They're very similar to the fire danger signs I talked about in the last video, where you're looking at a big town or field or whatever, but there's this sign that talks about fire danger. The reason that these creep me out so much is that things like sandstorms and wildfires are so gigantic. They're massive, and I think we as people tend to assume massive things are slow, but the reality is, things like tornadoes will just hurl down on you at insanely high speeds. Or even at a much smaller level, a bear looks gigantic, but it will absolutely chase you down. Anyway, what's scary about these signs is not just that, but the fact that to the untrained eye, there's really no signs of these things until they happen. Like, it seems ridiculous to think that a wildfire, or in this case, a sandstorm, could sneak up on you. But they really can. So to me it seems odd to have a sign warning about a danger that isn't visibly present. For example, this photo right here just shows a pretty sky. I cannot fathom, from this information alone, that such a megalophobic danger is present. But it is, and it could be right behind you. It's like a random event in a video game. They really can just pop up on the horizon. I think it's a combination of megalophobia and just some foreboding. I have never seen a sandstorm in real life, and I live somewhere where these do not occur. So there's an aspect of it to me that's just foreign. Can you cross this field? Okay guys, this one is a funny one. Mentioned by Cobalt Fusion, this refers to a sign that a rancher put on their field. I believe this started as a single farmer sign, potentially from Kent, England, but it's now been replicated and is something you can buy online or see in other places. It reads, "Do not cross this field unless you can do it in 9 seconds, because the bull can do it in 10. Hey, I don't want to mess with the bull, and this is a pretty good way of getting that across. A Hogigahara warning. This entry, mentioned by this user, refers to the forest in Japan, often referred to by Westerners as the suicide forest. You all know what happened here, and what unfortunately continues to happen here to this day. Anyway, in response to the horrible events that occur in these woods, due in part to some local superstition, the government put up these signs, urging people to consider options other than ending their own lives. This sign reads, "Life is a precious gift from your parents. Try to think calmly once more about them. Your siblings, your kids. Don't keep it to yourself. Please consult someone." And below that it offers a number that you can call if you need help. To be honest, I think that's quite the beautiful message. Of course, that alone isn't enough to stop the problem, but I do think it's very well intentioned. The fact that this sign needs to be here at all is pretty unsettling. Hopefully, one day it won't be needed anymore and can be taken down. Biting squirrels. Here's a much funnier one to cheer you up. Suggested by this user, one can find this hilarious sign at the Grand Canyon which warns you not to touch the squirrels. I love the way it, shows you a diagram of what's going on here. Instead of just saying the squirrels can be disease vectors, it, walks you through a diagram of how the squirrels have fleas which can carry the freaking plague. There are a few different designs of this sign, which is funny. Who knew this would have been enough of an issue that you'd have to keep making signs? I guess anywhere where there are tourists from far away, you have to put up warnings of stuff. Me, personally, I'm just surprised squirrels actually let you get that close to them. People probably feed them a lot too at the Grand Canyon, which is also banned, by the way. Code Red. Y'all remember that fire warning sign from the previous video? Where it had, a marker that could indicate the conditions were catastrophic for wildfires? Well, there's actually another version of that sign, this one showing the term Code Red. This commenter indicated that it was a level higher than catastrophic, but I could only find examples that show it the same way, meaning like Code Red replaces but is equal to catastrophic. The only difference I noticed between these, oddly enough, is that there's a blank white space in between Extreme and Code Red, whereas that space is filled in the catastrophic version. I have no idea which one came first or what that means, but I just thought it was interesting. Which one do you guys think is more effective? You enter, you die. This user brought up this sign from Russia. Now, I'm not going to embarrass myself trying to pronounce this, but as the user explains in their comment, it essentially reads very bluntly as, you enter, you die. This is plastered around electrical boxes and fenced areas in Russia. I really find these designs all pretty creepy. This one in particular is kind of disturbing, like the skull is super duper realistic. Anyway, I hadn't seen anything like this before, so thank you for bringing up. It is the first of a few Russian signs we have here today, such as the very next entry. Reckless driver finish line. Like I said, this one too comes from Russia. Apparently, in at least a few places, you can find this podium of sorts, on top of which is a wrecked car, and a sign that essentially reads, Finish line for reckless driver. Now, I for one have definitely seen a lot of warnings about crashing or DUIs or whatever that maybe show a picture of a wrecked car, but not usually on the road, and not usually with an actual car on them. I do think this stands out a lot and is a pretty good warning. It's a bit off-putting as well. I remember when my high school had dances or whatever and we wanted to warn people about drinking and driving, they would put a smashed car on the grass in front of the building for a few weeks before the event. This kind of reminds me of that. I also can't help but wonder the circumstances of whatever crash this car was involved in. I don't know, the whole thing just made me stop and think, which I guess is the point. Rescue here is unlikely. At Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia, you can find a sign that reads, Danger. Death has occurred here. Sudden high waves happen without warning, even on calm days. Dark rocks are slippery. Stay far back. Rescue here is unlikely due to conditions. Don't take risks. Leave here alive. This was brought up to me by this user who said they visited the site themselves. This one is especially creepy to me because from the limited photos I've seen of Peggy's Cove, it looks absolutely gorgeous. Like, I can't imagine deaths occurring here. It looks so calm and peaceful. But yeah, rocks and water are generally a horrible mix. Gabiru attack. This entry, suggested by this user, is kind of a meme out of Brazil. It is a real sign, though. In Brazilian Portuguese, Gabiru means black rat, and these signs are real and do warn about real disease dangers from rats. They're put up in urban areas, with one report I found saying they were found in a sewer. Brazil does have a lot of open sewers, so I think that's why it's a sort of unique sign. It is a bit goofy. I mean, rats don't usually act offensively towards you, but it is a serious disease vector. Drop and run. A few of you guys mentioned this one to me, and while it's not like a traffic sign, I find it spooky and wanted to put it here. Cobalt-60 is a radioactive isotope of cobalt. It has some applications with very specific tasks, like examining oil pipelines or finding deficiencies in metal parts, or even gamma knife radiosurgery. It is absolutely something you do not want to touch. One time it got released in Ciudad Juarez and exposed thousands of people to radiation. I believe this specific example is used for medical purposes or something like that, and that this photo is actually a fake replication. But the reason it's written here is because the sample should normally be built into equipment and you should never be able to touch it. If you do get near it, you should get away from it as soon as humanly possible. Hence the advice to drop and run. Trespassers will be eaten. Weaver Games mentioned a sign at the African Lion Safari in Ontario, Canada, which simply reads, "Trespassers will be eaten." These drive-through safaris are very common to North America, and I've actually even been to one myself. You can find signs like that at that location in Ontario, but also other ones, like this one in Royal Palm Beach, Florida. These signs sound funny until you consider that people do actually die at these places. As recently as 2016, one woman died after leaving her car and getting eaten by a Bengal tiger. This happened in Beijing, where a high IQ woman fought with her husband over driving, so she got out of the car to go over to his side and yell at him and tell him to let her drive. A tiger then began to stalk her, and her mother ran out of the car to go help her, at which point the tiger actually killed the mom, and the woman survived. She would later sue the zoo. One also may recall the famous case of Harambe. But of course, the child survived in that instance. A similar thing happened in Pittsburgh, 2012, when a 2-year-old boy died after his mother walked past numerous signs saying to stay back from a special observation deck. She later slipped with him in her arms, and he fell through a net designed to catch large pieces of debris. He fell into a den of African wild dogs and was immediately eaten. So, yeah, as goofy as these signs are, they sort of do have a place. You'd be surprised how many people forget how dangerous apex predators are. Ski slope bombs. There are plenty of places that I expect to find explosives. Military bases, fireworks stores, the Balkans. But at a ski resort? Not really one of those places. My friend Sam Scary mentioned this sign from the Taos Ski Valley in New Mexico, which reads, "Explosives. Do not touch. Color and shape may vary. Please report location to Ski Valley Office, extension 2385. Yeah, you heard that right. This resort drops munitions from planes and shoots them from artillery cannons to incite avalanches so that they don't happen while people are skiing. I'll show a video of this process. It's absolutely hilarious to me watching guys in yellow suits literally fire an artillery cannon. But yeah, this is an established process in tons of areas. Getting the avalanche out of the way beforehand is a great way to protect people, as odd as that might sound. Do not listen to your GPS. There are dozens of variations of this sign right here. In the earlier days of GPS, but still today to some degree, there would often be spots where your device would consistently get confused, and people would get lost or potentially put in dangerous places. These users both brought up this phenomenon. For whatever reason, this reminds me of the Local 58 video, "You're on the fastest available route." Spoiler alert for that, but basically a malevolent entity interferes with a guy's GPS and brings him to a dangerous spot. Anyway, some of these are super tame, but others feel a bit creepy to me. Especially the ones in like snowy areas or the outback, where your GPS might be completely oblivious to local environmental concerns. I don't think this is as much of a problem anymore, but I know it still does come up occasionally, with there even being a sort of recent lawsuit where a guy alleged Google Maps told him to drive off a bridge. My daddy works here. This is another broad category of signs, this one introduced to me by this user. While they all differ, some characteristics include a child's handwriting or pictures of a kid or family. I particularly like these ones in Comic Sans. They just look so absolutely fake to me. These exist all over the world in tons of languages. Once again, not super scary, but a ton of construction workers absolutely get beamed every year by cars, so when you think about it, it does get a little bit sadder. Your child can get strangled. This one actually freaked me out, and introduced me to a problem I didn't even know existed. This subject, brought up in a comment by Bluey Yippee, isn't as much of a sign as it is a warning label, but it's nonetheless terrifying. This is an image from a set of window blinds, with it pretty much outright showing a hanging child. There are a few variations of this, but this one right here is downright harrowing. A few years ago, the US Consumer Product Safety Commission said that around 9 children under the age of 5 in the USA die every year by strangulation using window blinds. There are even more injured, and in some cases, those injuries literally cause brain damage due to oxygen deprivation. I cannot imagine having a toddler. This whole situation reminded me about this terrifying commercial regarding the dangers of not anchoring your furniture. There are just so many ways little kids can get hurt, and that's freaking terrifying. I feel like a baby, at least, kind of just lays there. You can hold them and they just chill out. But a toddler? They're attracted to danger. They see batteries, nails, and rat poison, and they're licking their lips from side to side and putting a bib on, ready to eat it. If it can be grabbed, jumped off of, or eaten, toddlers are already there. Anyway, this illustration just really captured my attention. I suppose that means it works, but still, creepy. This will kill you and hurt. Some electrical boxes display this notice, as mentioned by this commenter. Though the message varies slightly from sign to sign, it generally looks like this. It reads, "Not only will this kill you, it will hurt the whole time you're dying." I think this is pretty interesting because, being that it's locked equipment or a locked panel, it seems that only trained professionals who would already know the risks would be messing around with these. I have a theory that this sign is actually aimed at crackheads hunting for their rightfully owned copper. One of my personal favorite, subgenres of signs are the ones pleading with crackheads not to completely destroy something because there's literally no copper there. Of course, I don't know if this is actually the case, it was just a gut feeling I had. Anyway, this sign absolutely gets the job done. It's a creepy message, and if it were me, personally, I would heed it. Shelter is full. This is one of the creepier signs on the entirety of this iceberg because of what it implies. Patcher72 brought this sign up, once again from Russia, and once again, very blunt and terrifying. It reads, loosely translated, "Shelter is full. Do not knock. Take cover in the folds of the terrain." This was a sign that was, according to some information I found on Russian websites and then translated, put up on shelters during the Cold War. The point, as you might have imagined, was to convince panicked outsiders to leave your shelter alone, assuring them that under no circumstances would they be let inside. It looks like this wasn't necessarily a government sign, and was instead made for purchase for civilians' makeshift shelters in places like garages or basements. It's obviously pretty scary to imagine what it might have been like to search for shelter during a missile attack and not find anywhere to go, resorting instead to hiding in a ditch or something, like this sign suggests. Of course, the Cold War never came to that point, making this sign an interesting relic of history. 2 cemeteries, no hospitals. This sign, which, according to this user, is from Australia, reads, "Drive carefully. We have 2 cemeteries, no hospital." Okay, that's it. To my Russians and Australian friends watching this video, what is it with your country's signage? You guys already have gulags and man-eating spiders. Do you really need depressing billboards too? Anyway, this specific one comes from Branxton, a town in New South Wales just north of Sydney. The sign, as it says, was put up by a local Lions Club, which is an international volunteer organization.
So it's not like a government sign and not one replicated all over Australia like some of the other ones we've talked about today. I'd bet they put this sign up here in response to lots of car crashes in the community, or else they just thought it was a helpful thing to have and also double over as like an advertisement for their group. So yeah, you won't find this one anywhere else, but it is pretty interesting. Pray before you are prayed for. This is a super unique sign from Indonesia. Eclipse Eris Archives, I think that's how it's pronounced, brought this one up. It reads, translated of course, pray before you are prayed for. Basically telling people to remember their 5 daily prayers, emphasizing that one's faith needs to be professed before their death. There are tons of iterations of this sign, usually around local mosques. It's interesting because this isn't really a creepy message at all. Rather, it's just someone encouraging others to be faithful and pray. It's just a little more direct than what we're used to. Except for, I guess, the hell is real sign. Anyway, yeah, I wouldn't say these are like terrifying signs. They're just very stark, I suppose. I do think it's kind of interesting. Some of them actually show coffins and stuff. Others just show the message, so in my opinion, that kind of changes the vibe from a gentle reminder to a terrifying warning. No oxygen. A couple people brought up these signs, which are just as interesting as they are terrifying. Turns out, apples are stored in chambers where they are nearly entirely deprived of oxygen. Instead of having the usual 21-ish% oxygen level, this is reduced to between 1 and 3%, and replaced with increased CO2 and nitrogen levels. This preserves apples, usually, keeping them available for months longer than normal. These are called anaerobic chambers, and can be extremely dangerous if entered improperly. This specific one was actually located behind a hospital, and so some people theorized it was for storing flammable material or precision equipment. But usually you'll encounter signs like this around places that are preserving apples during the off-season, which is pretty interesting. I would never have imagined anything at all related to apples could kill you, but yeah, it can. They might be your children. This sign can be found in Quebec and was suggested to me by this user. It sort of translates to, beware or watch for our children. They might be yours. It's just one of those signs asking you to slow down in a neighborhood or whatever, with the added suggestion to treat other people's homes and children like that of your own. However, the inclusion of what looks like a dead, or at best merely injured child, presumably that got ran over by a car, is a wild addition. But again, if it makes you stop and think, it works. Also, I've heard that drivers from Quebec are insane and probably do actually need this reminder. But yeah, I found this one really terrifying. If you steal, you will be lynched. There are all sorts of creepy signs in Mexico. So-called narco banners, for example, are occasionally put up, letting people know what the rules are around a certain area. This user specifically mentioned how there are various signs in Mexico that warn about lynching as a punishment if you're caught stealing. I imagine these are put up in those, markets, explaining that if you steal from one person, you're stealing from all of them, and if anyone catches you, they will step in and take care of you. Maybe they won't actually kill you, but I'm certain they'd beat the crap out of you. This one in particular reads, "Caution, if you rob one of us, you rob all of us. You will be lynched without compassion. Avoid being sanctioned." That same Instagram post showed another sign with a picture of what I assume is someone who was caught stealing. Anyway, if any commenters can attest to seeing similar signs like that in Mexico, I'd be very curious to hear your stories. But yeah, straight up getting told you'd be lynched if you steal is pretty metal. I would absolutely think twice if I came across that. Anthrax Burial Ground. This is our final sign from Russia, though of course I'm sure you could find something similar to this in lots of places. This was suggested to me in this comment. According to that user, these signs can be found in post-Soviet countries where farmers bury their cattle that died of epizootic diseases, including anthrax. Anthrax affects all sorts of farm animals, and they usually contract it from eating contaminated feed. Apparently in post-Soviet countries, these cattle graveyards popped up, and the government responded to them by fencing them off and leaving this sign, which loosely reads, "Anthrax Burial Ground is located here." There's a bunch of variations to this, and I'm willing to bet some were just put up by people in the community who collectively knew where they took their infected cattle. This happens all over the world too, like I said. I found an article from Hawaii, actually, that mentioned a housing development being impacted by one of these cattle burial grounds. But I hadn't heard of this before it was mentioned to me, and it's still such a strange foreign threat that I found it really creepy. Anthrax is very serious. I would not want anyone to come across it, by any means. Empire of the Dead. Our very last entry here today comes from Paris and was suggested by the Scholarly Baptist. This sign can be found at one of the entrances to the Paris catacombs, the underground burial site of over 6 million people. The sign reads, "Stop. This is the Empire of Death." This engraving is found at one of the spots where tourists can legally see a glimpse of the massive underground system. It doesn't show anything out of the ordinary, and it's only text, but it's quite off-putting when you consider just what you're walking into. Croton Wanderung. This was suggested to me by Waveburner1254. This is both a silly sign and one that identifies a real danger. Croton Wanderung literally means toad migration. I find it funny because as an English speaker, the word kind of looks like frog wandering to me. Anyway, basically during migration seasons, hundreds, if not thousands of frogs will just chill out on the road. This is obviously dangerous for the frogs, as any driver can just accumulate a kill streak on the road. But for cars, the sudden increase in frog density can make you slip off the road. Basically, these signs are put up on particularly curvaceous sections of road where the risk of slipping is greatest. The juxtaposition between a silly little frog and a legitimate danger of crashing your car is kind of interesting, and I think this is kind of just an interesting sign overall. There are still children to run over. This sign, suggested to me by a commenter, comes from a town in France. There's actually at least 2 examples of this, one handmade and one a bit more official looking, but I'll talk about that in a second. The message of this sign roughly translates to, "There are still children to run over. You can speed up." The message, of course, is an eye-catching criticism of speeding drivers, basically telling them that they're being an a-hole and that they need to slow down. I'm not sure if this town in particular had any problems that led to them needing to put this sign up, but it's a pretty stark and effective message. I don't know what it is about French-speaking people and their desire to bring up running over kids in their street signs. Like in part 2, we talked about this one from Quebec, which actually shows a dead or injured kid. Also, there's this similar handmade version of the sign with basically the same message, roughly translating to, "There are still kids to kill." Which, yeah, pretty bleak if you ask me. All these need are a picture and then they're ready to go. Molesting alligators. There's really nothing creepy about this, it's just hilarious. This was a commenter submission, by the way. There are signs all over Florida and probably other places as well that say, "Do not feed or molest alligators." Now, it is great advice not to molest alligators, or really anything or anyone for that matter, but we're not talking about Minecraft YouTuber molesting. More like just bothering or annoying. I believe the word molest, if you trace it back further enough, means more like to disturb or to upset. In Spanish, the word molestar means to annoy, and I distinctly remember in like 8th grade our teacher giving us 10 seconds to laugh about it before we moved on. What this sign is really saying is not to bother the alligators, which makes a ton of sense. It's generally common advice and occasionally required rules not to mess with animals. But surely they could have seen this coming. The rest of the message is pretty funny as well. My personal favorite is that they can mistake a hand for a handout, as in, they'll eat you. Giant mosquito. This sign was also suggested by a commenter. This is a series of funny signs that you can find on the Grand Drive in Denali, Alaska. This giant mosquito evidently abducting a person is part of a series of signs along the road which were put up to increase attentiveness for drivers who saw them and get confused. Which is, I suppose, creative. Though I'm not sure how much this would really accomplish. Alongside the mosquito sign is the unique spaghetti junction sign, even though this road has no turns whatsoever. There's also a troll bridge sign, a 13-mile-an-hour speed limit sign, a falling coconut sign, a do not read sign, and my personal favorite, a sign that reads, "Wet when raining." I don't see an official count of all of these anywhere, but there are a bunch. They were actually put out by a hotel that's up the road, explaining how anyone was allowed to put such goofy things up. And it ended up getting a lot of free publicity for the hotel, so I guess it worked out for them. Toxic clams. This is kind of a weird one. This sign, or better, series of signs, refers to the dangers of eating select shellfish species. Specifically, they mention butter clams and how these can be poisonous. Most of these are from Washington State, where people harvest lots of clams, but where there are also plenty of algal blooms and marine biotoxins, making it occasionally unsafe to eat these bad boys. Specifically, they have a problem with paralytic shellfish poisoning. The symptoms, if you catch that, are extremely horrible. First, within minutes of eating a clam with PSP, your tongue and mouth will begin to tingle. Soon after, this tingling will move to your hands and fingers, all the way down to your feet and toes. At this stage, you may begin to feel nauseous and experience a sense of floating. If you've had enough of these clams, your chest and abdomen muscles may begin to be paralyzed. These include the muscles implicated in breathing, which, as you can guess, can lead to suffocation. The quickest that someone has died from eating some of these poisoned clams was just under half an hour. So, yeah, it's not really the sign itself as much as it is the danger it's warning us about. Pretty horrible if you ask me, and something I would definitely want to avoid. Dingo warning. So, dingoes are not super dangerous. They're small, and an able-bodied adult should be able to fight them off, and most attacks are directed towards children. But that doesn't mean they're entirely safe. This sign, pointed out by Broken Art, reads, "Aggressive dingo behavior towards people has occurred in this area." I like that it's got a little picture of a dingo. This sign also has an interesting piece of advice, which is that you shouldn't run. Apparently, this will trigger a prey drive instinct in the dingoes, who will then chase you. Overall, not the scariest sign in the world. I do think they're kind of funny though, especially the part where it says, "savagely attack." But yeah, if I lived in Australia, I would add dingoes to the giant list of animals to avoid over there. Moving parts. A couple commenters mentioned this one. There are at least a dozen different designs for moving parts signs, usually used in manufacturing or machinery. Really anything with moving metal that can suck you in or crunch fingers or limbs, or worse, your entire body. Some of these aren't like really graphic, but they're descriptive, I suppose, showing all the things that can happen to you if you aren't being careful. I don't even really have a particular specific sign for this entry. I just wanted to go over how awful some of these can be. I have like a visceral reaction to seeing things like this and imagining it happening to my own body parts. I guess that means it works? But yeah, these are rightfully over the top, and I needed to cover them here. Counterterrorism response level. This is another adjustable sign, like the fire or avalanche danger ones that we've looked at previously. The counter-terrorist response level, or the United Kingdom's terror threat levels, is a system used by the UK's Ministry of Defence to communicate how much of a danger terrorism poses to the public at a given moment. What's kind of funny about this, though, is that they publicly display this threat on like an adjustable board. There's a couple different versions of these signs, which appear, at least that I can see, at the Home Office and Ministry of Defence main building. In this case, when it's listed as heightened, that's actually the response level, basically how alert they are towards a threat. A heightened response corresponds with a threat level of either severe or substantial. Based on the text in this sign in particular, it looks like this is more of a warning for employees, reinforcing their need for security strategies so they aren't, say, letting people into buildings that don't belong or leaking valuable intelligence. It's sort of a mix of terrifying and funny, just because of how in your face it all is. Killer bees present. This is a sign that can be found all over at job sites in the US, probably in other countries as well, I'm sure. This one was brought to my attention by a commenter who saw them specifically in Puerto Rico. This version of it reads, "Caution, Africanized bees may be present." And it then lists instructions and tips, including telling you to tell a supervisor if you see them. There's a pretty interesting news report about this AEP site in particular, where they mentioned how they haven't fully tested the local bees to see if they have been Africanized, which basically means that European and African honeybees have hybridized to create the killer bee. This might just seem like a nuisance until you consider what these things can do to you. A small handful, like 2 or 3 people, are killed by these killer bees annually. They are much more aggressive and swarm more frequently, and a sting from them can cause something as little as a red bump to something as aggressive as breathing troubles. If you're already allergic to bees and one of these more large, aggressive swarms targets you, you could be in serious danger. Couple that with a work site and all the dangers that could come with that, and it's just not a good mix. It's also interesting to me because this is sort of a new threat. Americans haven't really grown up with killer bees. Rather, these are something that have been slowly introduced over the past 30 years, with them first being observed in Texas in 1990. Even then, they've spread extremely slowly throughout the country, so there is a big fear factor and lots of misconceptions about them. I mean, I feel like every year or so I see a news story about them, and they still feel new. Anyway, I just thought it was a worthwhile sign to put on here today. Poison Spider Trail. The Poison Spider Trail is a hike near Moab in Utah. It's a beautiful and famous trail in and of itself, and there's actually even dinosaur prints around it. But what's weird is seeing what is presumably a warning sign about poisonous spiders and the exact same art style as normal warnings in US parks. I mean, this looks real. Turns out, though, this is not an area with a particular black widow problem. I mean, there are black widows in Utah and probably around here, but that's not really what the sign is about. There is a legend dating all the way back to 1896 that suggests a little girl named Mary Jane Francis died after being bitten by a spider. Near the end of the trail, there even used to be a fake grave and memorial for this little girl, but it looks like the Parks Department removed the whole thing because it was causing people to litter, leaving little gifts or whatnot there, which obviously could become a problem for the park. Now, I don't think there's any real consensus as to whether or not the legend is real. I mean, it probably isn't, but people did die of spider bites way back in the day, and we didn't have antivenom back then. I do really appreciate that the Parks Department kind of leaned into the legend, though. Not just with the trail name, but by adding the sign. It's pretty unique, and at first glance, it looks kind of spooky. I've never actually seen a warning sign for spiders, which would lead me to take one very seriously if I did see it. Like, my first assumption was just that there would be hundreds of black widows in the area, or something. No safe PPE exists. This is a series of signs I've wanted to talk about for a while. You can see this phrase on signs set up by electricians at work sites, although I believe the phrase has also been appropriated for use around radiological materials as well. Generally, however, these signs exist when there is a major risk of an arc flash. I'm not an electrician, and I don't really want to just parrot a Wikipedia explanation of how these come about, but basically, as I understand it, energized work means working on an electrical system that's actively turned on. Normally, electricians, turn everything off, then do their work, and then turn it back on. But I'm sure there are some use cases where you have to work on a system that's actively energized. However, there exist some situations like this where you have so much power that any energized work could lead to an arc flash, which there is no way to adequately protect your body from. There's no armor or helmet or whatnot that's going to make you survive this. So, yeah, I kind of get it. The phrase itself, though, is just really creepy. A reminder that there's no way to protect you from a threat. That you just have to avoid it in the first place. Car accident silhouettes. This is a series of signs suggested to me by this commenter. In France, at the site of car accidents, you can occasionally find these man-shaped signs with a cross on them. Sometimes there's a year and date included, which is just, it's freaking creepy. It's humanizing to see how old the person is, even if that's just one small detail. These appear in different forms. One of them were actually based off a design created in 2001 by high schoolers in a competition to come up with an attention-grabbing way to make drivers safer. And this just... wow. The road impaling the figure and what sort of looks like a heart, or maybe just blood around the torso, it's absolutely terrifying. Some have messages about not being on your phone, and there's also one with a figure in a wheelchair showing a warning about drinking and driving. And without a doubt, the worst of these are the ones that include little kids. The text for this one is obscured on Google Maps, but the sign on this little girl's silhouette reads, "Mommy, where are you?" Why did you feed me to death? This one is much more sad than scary. This comes from somewhere in Germany. I'm going to presume maybe a petting zoo or just a farm. It displays the late Snowman, the beloved pony belonging to, well, wherever this is. It's an extremely sad and stark reminder of one of the many reasons why you can't just feed wild animals. Generally, unless you're a vet or some other type of expert, you don't know what animals can eat. Lots of foods that are perfectly fine for us simply aren't for them. Warning signs not to feed animals are super common all over, especially in parks, with the common reasons cited being that it makes the animals want to approach humans more, which can make them aggressive. This is a super common issue with bear especially, so much so to the point where there's a saying that a fed bear is a dead bear. because if they associate people with food, they'll start to approach us and eventually have to be put down. This case in particular shows another consequence, which is that some food will outright kill animals, including beloved pets. It's such a shame that these people lost their pony, and a great illustration of why you shouldn't do this. Bawal Tumawid. Commenter EDS Brain told me about this one from the Philippines, specifically in and around Manila. Apparently, there's a serious problem with jaywalking there. Specifically, the kind of jaywalking that results in fatalities. So much so that one can find a sign which reads, well, I'm not going to read it, but it translates to, "Do not cross, people have already died here." It's certainly a stark warning, with the clear message laid out in large, white on red block letters. It's so blunt that it really creeps me out. What's even creepier is something else that the commenter mentioned. The signs used to have this message, which was slightly different and only said, "Do not cross, deadly." But people continued to ignore those signs, so the message itself had to be upped in severity to read that people had already died. It's really a case of environmental storytelling. Very terrifying, and though I've never been to the Philippines, I've seen how traffic can be in Southeast Asia, and I would not want to tempt fate there. Culebra bombs. We've frequently talked about munitions in this series, but this one has a bit of an interesting story to it. Culebra is a Puerto Rican island, though this same thing has also occurred on Vieques, another island in Puerto Rico. For many years, particularly after World War II, the US Navy used Culebra for military exercises, including ship-to-shore operations and aerial bombing. In 1970, the residents of the island launched a campaign to persuade the Navy and the US government to end all of this. Eventually, Nixon and later Ford would permanently halt these exercises, though the exercises on Vieques ended in 2003 at the direction of Bush. However, there are still relics of this training, like these tanks you can find on Flamenco Beach on Culebra. But more eerily, there remains the threat of unexploded ordnances. These are signs that you can find on both of the islands. Now, previously, we talked about places where there were small artillery rounds, like this guy in West Virginia. But here is a bomb that the Army cleaned up in 2019. This is a 500-pound, quote, general-purpose bomb that was left undetonated. Despite there still probably being rounds here, the beaches are getting safer and safer each year, and the island is mostly cleaned up by now, though there are still some prohibited military areas and such, and the signs will likely remain. Thanks to Gulag Mike for this recommendation. Amoebic meningitis. Primary amoebic meningitis, or PAM, is a rare but nearly always fatal brain infection caused by the amoeba Nalgeria fowleri. There's no way I pronounced that right, which destroys brain tissue. Infection occurs when contaminated, warm fresh water enters the body, usually through the nose. Early symptoms include intense headache, fever, nausea, and vomiting, which quickly becomes neck stiffness, confusion, and coma, typically resulting in death within 1 or 2 weeks. These are the brain-eating amoeba you may have heard of from a couple real cases of people, including young and fit swimmers, dying because of this. There are signs warning of this danger in both the US, in particular Washington, and other places like Australia. The danger gets particularly worse when the water is warm, so you'll see some of these signs specifically talk about a certain temperature of the water where there's more danger in that warmer season. They also mention how it's a lot worse to put your face or head in the water, as you're likely to get those bad boys through your nose. In the USA, at least, around 10 people die annually from this condition, so it really is advice worth following. Hot sand. This is an Italian sign from the island of Ischia, a beautiful place which, though not necessarily looking the part, is a volcanic island. For that reason, in certain parts of the beaches, the sand reaches the unusually high temperature of 100 degrees Celsius, or 212 Fahrenheit. I've been at, regular beaches without shoes on and felt like the sand was way too hot for my bare feet, so I can't even imagine something like this. At that temperature, you could receive third-degree burns in as little as just a few seconds of exposure. Now, it's kind of funny because depending on the spot, people will actually relax in this geothermically heated sand. But, some places, I guess, are just complete no-go zones. Me personally, I don't know if I would test it at all. But this sign is pretty effective, I'd say. I really can't even fathom sand getting that hot, so seeing that warning would really capture my attention. Dismount now. This extremely emphatic trail sign can be found in Moab, Utah, and was pointed out to me by this commenter. This is specifically on the Portal Trail, where you can ride mountain bikes, but there is a particularly nasty drop that you need to pay attention to. The sign itself reads, "Dismount now. Do not ride over the next rock. 200-foot cliff. Riders have died here. Riders just like you." Now, if you're wondering what exactly a 200-foot cliff looks like, here's a video taken by Defend Ride Company. Keep an eye out to the left. You can see that while you could probably power through that, there's a 2-foot wide piece of ground, and even a slight deviation would throw you right off of that cliff. Personally, I feel like the sign could be a bit bigger, or maybe show up earlier, though I guess in their defense there are a couple of similar signs leading up to that specific point, so this is kind of like the final warning, and I guess they probably got the word across. Still though, that drop is absolutely terrifying, and even if I was an experienced rider, I wouldn't take my chances there. I mean, if you were going fast at all through that, I feel like you could just miss that sign. Very creepy indeed. This side is most dangerous. A commenter identified this particularly terrifying one. This refers to a series of handmade or hand-painted signs set up in St. Petersburg, which would read, "This side is most dangerous." These were set up on the north sides of the street during World War II because during shelling, those areas were more likely to be struck. I'm guessing that if the siege was south to north, the buildings would sort of shield a lot of the munitions, and if rounds did get past buildings, that would mean they'd have to land on the far side, if that makes sense. There are a lot of historical photos of these signs, which are all very interesting. And there's even a few of them which have been maintained or restored that are still visible to this day. Hijacking hotspot. We haven't been back to South Africa since the first upload, but we're back for this one. In case you didn't know, South Africa is insanely prone to vehicle hijackings. You might have even seen this video of an armored bank truck in South Africa fending off a hijacking attempt, but it also happens to just regular cars. These signs are placed throughout various locations in South Africa where these hijacking attempts are common. There are a ton of these signs, and you'll notice that they're standardized like highway signs, which is sort of scary in and of itself. These aren't community warnings, but official, commonplace signs letting you know of a threat that the government can't really control. My personal favorite versions of these signs are the ones that have the added information below saying for how many kilometers the warning is valid. It's so funny because it's just so casual. Hey, hijackings are common for the next 2 kilometers, but afterwards you're fine. It's like the signs in the USA or Canada that will warn about deer for a couple of miles, as if once those 2 miles pass, there's just no deer anymore. It's so casual, but such a scary threat that the juxtaposition is kind of funny. Do not eat these apples. This warning sign to not eat apples isn't talking about your typical red or green ones. No, this is referring to the Tree of Death. A member of my Discord actually pointed this one out to me. Anyway, the Tree of Death, also known as the machineal tree, produces these fruits, which at first glance at least look like a small apple, or maybe just some other harmless fruit. Long story short, if you eat this fruit, you might die. But the problems persist before you even put it in your mouth. The tree of death produces an incredibly deadly sap which is present in every single part of the tree. The bark, the leaves, and most importantly, the fruit. Just handling the fruit can cause your hand to blister. Any part of your skin, though, is in danger. The sign points out that just standing under this tree while it rains can cause the sap to trickle down onto your skin, potentially leading to irritation and burns everywhere. Then, if you actually eat the apples, you can get very ill. Though death is certainly possible, there haven't been any fatalities recorded recently. An account of the sensation felt after eating these, though, sourced from Wikipedia, reads as follows. When ingested, the fruit is reportedly pleasantly sweet at first, with a subsequent strange peppery feeling, gradually progressing to a burning, tearing sensation and tightness of the throat. Symptoms continue to worsen until the patient can barely swallow solid food because of the excruciating pain and the feeling of a huge obstructing pharyngeal lump. These trees are found in the Caribbean, so many of my viewers, and myself, don't have to worry about running into one of these trees of death anytime soon. Bushfire Place of Last Resort. This sign, also suggested by a commenter, can once again be found in Australia. We are really not going to leave this continent behind anytime soon. A bushfire place of last resort is exactly what it sounds like. It is a high-risk survival location during wildfires that is not nearly as good as a well-built home, shelter, or better yet, already having evacuated. These are not considered safe. They're just safer. These can be open fields or parks that have less fuel to burn, or maybe small ponds or makeshift shelters. What's interesting about these signs is I don't feel like they really communicate that danger. I mean, I guess if you live in bushfire country, you've probably been raised aware of the risks. But the sign, for starters, is just green, and it shows a family or small community. It almost looks inviting, even though the conventional advice is that these are not places you would want to be during a bushfire. It's such an average-looking sign that it really fails to communicate what it might be like to stand in the middle of a soccer field or whatever, surrounded by 100-foot-tall flames. In this instance, it's much more the threat than the sign that's so scary. Famagusta signs. This is a very interesting entry that requires a lot of backstory that I'm going to try and summarize as briefly as humanly possible. Famagusta is a city on Cyprus's east coast, which is sort of emblematic of the island's division as a whole. It was once a thriving tourist and commercial hub, especially the area known as Varosha. However, in 1974, after Greece staged a coup in Cyprus that was then followed by the Turkish military intervention, the city would find itself in the heart of a battle. There was a bit of actual combat there, but Turkish forces quickly took the city and Varosha was sealed off and abandoned, with its Greek Cypriot residents fleeing and never returning. Today, the city is split, and many of the Greek neighborhoods have been fenced off. Greek Cypriots, who can't easily travel to the Turkish side of the island in the first place, can't go back to their neighborhoods or homes. Now, the footage I've been showing is actually from my second channel that I bring up a lot. I actually went there on part of a tour, which was extremely fascinating. Though much of this place is still fenced off, as my tour guide explained it, the Turkish Cypriots have opened a few streets, almost as a taunting mechanism for a negotiation tactic. They let tourists into the abandoned, war-torn neighborhoods, but not the actual Greeks who lived there. But anyway, this video isn't about that, it's about this sign mentioned by a commenter, and I can attest that these are everywhere. They were seriously put up like every 20 feet. They're used to fence off the actual buildings. You can't enter them, you're only allowed to walk on the streets. They just say, "Forbidden Zone," with a soldier pictured. There is a Turkish military base right there, and I can attest to the fact that there are guys with guns pretty much everywhere when you're actually exploring this place. This is another case where, while the sign is creepy, it's not necessarily terrifying, whereas the situation as a whole kind of is. It's an incredibly eerie place to visit, given what happened, and just the physical decay of the buildings is really hard to describe. There are a couple different versions of these signs, but generally they all look like this. I'm sure you wouldn't be shot trespassing as a tourist, but still, they're pretty odd. Drawstring warnings. These signs can be found in children's parks, sometimes in a sticker format and sometimes as actual signs, warning of the danger of kids choking on drawstrings on hoodies and sweatshirts while using playground equipment. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission recorded 18 deaths and 38 non-fatal incidents between 1985 and 2009 involving this sort of thing happening. So while it's not like a boogeyman that you have to worry about every single day, it's definitely a real threat that could occur, and not something that I would ever want to experience as a parent. Jumping sturgeon. A rare but potentially fatal threat that exists while boating is fish jumping above and into the boat and then striking people. Well, at first that seems ridiculous. Injuries are caused by this thing happening all the time, and sometimes people, including children, are even killed. This sign from Florida warns about this very thing happening. Specifically, it mentions the Gulf sturgeon, which can grow upwards of 9 feet and weigh several hundred pounds. These fish are genuinely insane. I don't think I've ever seen a picture of one before researching this, and from the underside, they almost look like alligators. They are literally ginormous. So imagine one of these things coming at you full speed as you ride a boat towards it, also at full speed, and it just impales you. There's no way you'd see it coming. You'd just get sniped out of nowhere. Something Polish. This sign was suggested to me by the Forgotten 9712. These are very similar to the French silhouettes that I mentioned earlier, used to indicate sites of car crashes. However, these signs are a bit different, set up around intersections or crosswalks that are particularly deadly for whatever reason. You'll also probably notice two things about them. The first is that they look very official, and are more than just wooden or handmade signs created by the community. And the second is these two numbers on the bottom. On the right is how many people who have been injured here, and on the left is how many people have been killed. To me, I just find it creepy that these are like standard real road signs. These can be found all over the country and just very explicitly say how many people have died. Here in the US, we don't really have anything like that. I mean, occasionally there are places like Blood Alley, which we talked about in part 2, that have signs talking about their particular danger, but you don't see them on every corner. Some of these numbers get really high, and they're just spooky to look at. I don't know if I would want this reminder as I was driving. Beach umbrella warning. Annually, around 4,000 Americans end up in the ER due to accidents caused by beach umbrellas. As ridiculous as that sounds, they can easily catch the wind and move at high speeds, potentially smacking you unconscious, or worse, driving themselves straight through your torso, impaling and killing you. As recently as 2024, beaches across the US have begun to put up these safety signs warning about this, linking you to more information and telling you to anchor your umbrellas. The sign here is really creepy, showing blood on these black stick figures, which is something you usually don't see in this style. There are several variations of these signs, and they've been spotted from New Jersey all the way to Florida. It really does seem incredulous that this many people are getting injured, but this injury rate is real, and though rare, deaths have occurred, such as in 2022 when a 63-year-old woman was impaled through the torso in South Carolina.
South Africa fire danger. In this series, we've been no stranger to different fire danger signs. But this one, which comes from South Africa, is so unique that I felt it was worth sharing. In this one, there's an unlabeled section just past extremely dangerous, which shows a deer staring directly at you, with a tear streaming down its face. Or maybe an impala or something. I'm not sure exactly what specific cervid there are in South Africa. I had to include this here because I found this design really freaky. I don't know what it is about this deer, but it just looks creepy to me. Just the way it's staring at me. There are a few other designs of this sign which also use a crying deer as a sort of mascot, but they aren't nearly as off-putting as this first one is. Here we are, waiting for you. This message, written in archaic Portuguese, I actually thought it was Spanish at first, translates to, "Here we are, waiting for you," and can be found above the entrance to a cemetery in Paraibuna, a city in Brazil. It's not totally unheard of to see these somber warnings to the living written in stone at cemeteries. We even mentioned one from the Paris catacombs in the last part. But I found this one really spooky. It just seems the total opposite of welcoming, and the framing here makes it look like it's intentionally trying to look like a haunted house decoration. Shot putting area. Alright, this sign in particular isn't too horrifying visually, but it does talk about one of these dangers that no one really thinks about. Also, you may have never seen these because they aren't like street signs. You'd only see them on a track. And by track, I mean a running track, like these things. I did a lot of running when I was younger and put up some times that I'm pretty proud of. And I can attest to the fact that when you're at track meets, every single person is doing something completely different. You'll easily have 400 or 500 people packed in here. Some people are stretching, others are jogging to warm up, people are actively racing or jumping or throwing, and it's so easy to completely smack the hell out of someone. I once walked into a long jumper's path, which I still feel pretty bad about. But when you do that, the worst that's going to happen is that you're going to run into someone and you both fall, or whatever. But the throwing areas are a lot different. This warning is for shot put, which is when athletes throw the weighted ball, but the same issue exists as well, if not in a worse way, for javelin and hammer too. Every year, at least somebody at some track meet will get concussed by a shot put or hammer or fully impaled by a javelin. Usually this happens when people aren't paying attention to the throw lines, which was the case in 2005 when an elderly volunteer was killed by a shot putter from Ohio State, who, through absolutely no fault of his own, threw the shot put and hit the man, who wore hearing aids and wasn't aware of what was going on, right in the skull, killing him. The same thing actually happened in my college, where a hammer throw completely destroyed the leg of an older volunteer, though there's not any news article about it for some reason. I think because the guy didn't die. While it's sort of rare, this is one of those things where everyone involved is going to be traumatized if it does happen. Like, if you're not paying attention and you walk into whatever you call the throwing zone here, you're going to be publicly executed in front of hundreds of kids. And then one of those kids is going to live the rest of their lives having killed someone, and will probably be quite a bit messed up. It's also really easy to do this. Like, there's so much movement and yelling and stuff happening at track meets that it's very possible that if you're not paying attention, you could end up in the wrong spot. Asbestos in air. Asbestos is a particularly horrifying danger, and the conditions which can result from exposure to it are extremely deadly. There are dozens of signs warning of asbestos contamination that I could have put on this iceberg, but there was one in particular brought to my attention by two separate commenters. Wittenroom was a town in Australia where blue asbestos was mined from 1941 to 1966. Though there's no mining there nowadays, the entire community and surrounding areas are unsafe, and asbestos remains in the ground, easily kicked up by the air. Many of the roads were paved in asbestos, so driving on them can send lingering particles up in the air.
This was actually the case for the airport as well, which was closed because the runways had been paved with gravel mixed with asbestos tailings. The town has been closed and straggling residents evicted. The Australian government warns against going anywhere near this place, which is actually the largest exclusion zone in the southern hemisphere, being about a fifth the size of Chernobyl. There is still occasional extreme tourism that heads out there though. This sign can be found around the entrance to the old town, which reads, "Asbestos fibers and dust are present and may be airborne in and around Witten Room. Airborne asbestos fires and dust are a health hazard and may result in serious illness in the event of inhalation. Asbestos fiber and dust concentrations in the air are increased by vehicular, human, animal, and other movements." While mining operations were active and families were living there, it's estimated that asbestos contributed to around 1,200 deaths. With there not being an easy way to quickly know if you're breathing contaminated air, this place is an extremely dangerous one to visit, or even drive through, and this sign reflects exactly that. Sniper. Sniper, or how it's written in Bosnian, or whatever you want to call this mutually intelligible language shared across countries, refers to these signs put up in Sniper Alley in Sarajevo during the Bosnian War. These were the areas most littered with Serbian snipers and the most difficult places for citizens to go about their lives. This sign, which reads, "Pazi Sniper," translates to "Watch out, Sniper." Many of these were set up crudely and quickly in an effort to warn people in the community. These snipers were a particularly awful part of the conflict, indiscriminately shooting civilians, including children. People regularly had to sprint across the street, or wait for UN vehicles to pass so they could crouch behind them. This sign is also all the more terrifying to look at when you consider the recent news and legal developments that Italy is now taking very seriously that used to be considered rumors, stating that wealthy tourists were coming to Sarajevo to go on human hunts. Allegedly, these human hunters who came from all over the world would come to Sarajevo to snipe people, even paying extra to do so to kids. While it's unknown if anyone who did this will ever be prosecuted, it's at least being recognized and taken seriously. Many people have said this was happening for years, but no one really acknowledged it, so this is a step forward. There are some particularly gripping and terrifying photos from this city in particular that really just make these signs feel so much worse. They were a desperate attempt to give people just a slightly greater chance of survival in an awful situation. Thanks to this commenter for bringing it up. Highway of Tears. There are a couple signs that I could use to illustrate this danger and the broad social problem across Canada, but this one that I'm showing is probably one of the creepiest. This was suggested by a commenter. The Highway of Tears is a 719 kilometer, or 447 mile, stretch of Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert in British Columbia, Canada. Since the highway's completion in 1969, this corridor has been linked to around 80 kidnappings and murders of women. The term was first coined in 1998 at a vigil. Many of these women are Indigenous, and so the highway is strongly associated with the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement. There are a number of proposed causes for the danger of hitchhiking on this particular highway, from poverty to domestic violence to drug abuse to the general disruption of Native societies and communities. There isn't any one answer as to how these women go missing or how to help stop it. But one thing we can do is warn women not to hitchhike with strangers, which is what these signs advocate for. This sign in particular appears to show the ghosts of murdered women convincing a girl not to stay on the path she's currently going down, which is downright terrifying. But hopefully it works, and that's enough to convince some people to make safer choices. Trash on the ground, shot in the head. This sign, suggested by a commenter, is a sign used in Brazil that's become a bit of a meme, but knowing Brazil, I do not doubt the veracity of what's said one bit. This phrase, which is generally painted on handmade signs, is used in gang-controlled areas as a form of litter control. basically saying that you'll be killed if you dump garbage. This is an example of the sign signed with the initials CV, which stands for Red Command, one of the largest criminal organizations in Brazil. There's an interesting article written about this sign where a resident suggests they aren't 100% sure if the gang actually put that up or if it's just someone impersonating them to be edgy. But the creation of banners with instructions by gangs is a common practice in Brazil, so there's no huge reason to doubt it. Some places in Brazil have signs set up by gangs with instructions as to how you should enter a neighborhood, like telling you to open your windows and turn your lights on inside your car if you want to move through the area safely, so they can tell you're not an opposing gang or something. Now, none of these signs have like a dead dude hanging next to them, but I still don't doubt that these guys mean what they say. Prairie dogs have the plague. We're ending on a slightly funnier, but still serious note. These signs can be found in at least a few states, as the plague has been observed in prairie dogs from New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, California, Oregon, Nevada, and the Dakotas. Probably more places, but these ones fairly frequently. While the plague spreading throughout prairie dog communities is bad enough, as it can wipe out a keystone species in a certain area, it also poses a threat to pets and people as well, albeit probably a minor one. Humans usually catch the plague from fleas or small rodents, but dog-to-human transmission was recorded in 2014, and dogs can get it from these prairie dogs. Also in 2016, a documented case of prairie dog to a human was observed. A 66-year-old trapper contracted by the city of Santa Fe to remove prairie dogs was bitten by one that was observed to be bleeding from the nostrils. Later, he fell ill, and though he fully recovered, he was confirmed to have been infected with the plague. Even though we can basically treat the plague now, I still don't want it. I know we already talked about not feeding or improperly handling wild animals, so just make sure you're not doing it to prairie dogs in the western US, because getting the plague would suck. Thank you to this guy for suggesting this one. Okay guys, we have now reached the new end of the video. I hope you enjoyed watching the recap, and as promised, here are a couple more signs for you guys. First off, we have this sign from Spooky Slot Canyon, mentioned by a user in my Discord server. This sign at the foot of the trail is pretty interesting. Before you even get to the message, you might be intrigued by the way this is built. The base of the sign is actually an indicator of the amount of space you'll have at the narrowest parts of the trail. While useful, it's definitely a bit intimidating, serving as a physical reminder of what's about to come. That said, the trail looks absolutely gorgeous and really fun to walk through. These signs look to have been installed in 2025 in response to various rescues because of people who were too big getting stuck. And though that sounds kind of funny, it can be absolutely dangerous because these trails not only get hot, but flood extremely frequently. This is not somewhere you want to be stuck for a few hours by any means whatsoever. This next sign comes from Garner State Park in Texas, also mentioned in my Discord server. It's a warning sign about rope swings with the clever text, "Say nope to the rope." It's pointing out how rope swings aren't maintained by the park, and that they're very dangerous. I once frequented a rope swing near where I lived, and it was a constant arms race between random people who would set them up, and the police who would cut them down, because one time a drunk kid drowned there. And I watched a lot of people just eat it on them over the years. One guy in particular just held on to the rope instead of jumping and smacked the heck out of a tree when he came back. Anyway, while rope swinging is a ton of fun, it's best to only use ones that you trust. Lots of younger people will just come across them and use them, and either they break or they drop you into shallow water or something like that, and you seriously can die. There's no perfect estimate of how many Americans die on these each year, but there are typically hundreds of annual injuries reported.
Drug trafficking in Singapore is no joke. Doing so will result in the death penalty, and they make it beyond clear when you're at the airport. There are all sorts of warnings about drug trafficking in Singapore, and also Malaysia for that matter. There are signs in the airport, there's a stamp on your entry card, and apparently, according to some people, you'll even see a notice about it on your in-flight entertainment screen when you're getting close to landing. But this one in particular is probably the most compelling I've seen. It, in no uncertain terms, makes it clear exactly what the punishment is for those over 18 who traffic heroin. And that's literally how they do it too. People in Singapore are drop-hung with a noose. The vast majority of people in Singapore support the death penalty, and they actually go through with it a few times each year, with most executions being for drug traffickers. So if you needed a better reminder not to be a drug trafficker, this is it. I've actually crossed the land border from Mexico to the US once, and I remember there being like these signs that said fentanyl kills in Spanish, and then saying how you could go to prison for being a drug mule. But they were nothing like this one. Also, this one once again came from someone in my Discord, so thank you for that. Okay, this is a sign I found on r/scary signs, which if you've ever enjoyed these videos, you should check out, because pretty much all of these signs end up there at some point. This is located at some Catholic church. The OP doesn't say where, but it's a message laid out in front of an image of the Virgin Mary where people go with petitions to pray, basically asking for aid in some way or another. Now, the sign is reminding people not to touch the image so as to not damage it. And the second line, in my opinion, is referring to how the Virgin Mary will touch your life, as in, influence it. But when it's written out here like this, it just sounds so funny. Do not touch her, she will touch you. For our final entry today, and perhaps ever, at least in terms of signs, we have a sign that was emailed to me a while ago actually, and I intended to put it on part 3, but I honestly just forgot. The person who sent it preferred to stay anonymous, but thank you anyway for sharing it with me. This is a sign from Lawrence, Massachusetts, an extremely poor American city with lots of violence and homelessness. It borders the city mentioned in the sign, Methuen, and basically it's saying that once you leave the previous city limit, the police will not help you whatsoever. This is located on a bike trail between the cities where unsuspecting riders or walkers looking for a little leisure time might go to, unaware of the dangers. It reads, "Stop. You are approaching the end of the Methuen Rail Trail and the Methuen city limits. Areas ahead are not patrolled by Methuen police." Now, of course, what the police are saying here is that you're going to another jurisdiction, but the way it's written just really seems like the police have just given up. I know many people know about this sort of thing in whatever city they live in, like areas that you shouldn't go to, but in the USA, at least, it's not frequently put into words like this, that a given place or area is so dangerous that police just aren't even available there. The resignation in the message is what disturbs me. Below it, there's also a sign offering resources and hotlines for homeless people, or those seeking help with their addiction. Okay guys, that was 102 scary signs. I hope you really enjoyed this supercut video, and I hope that, even if I'm not covering scary signs again, that you'll still subscribe to my channel. I have lots of icebergs, creepy website investigations, and analog horror/ARG videos planned for the future. So make sure to subscribe so you can stay tuned for that, and so that you don't lose this channel forever. Thank you to my Patreon subs and channel members who watched this video early. As a reminder, joining either of these will get you thanked in each and every video alongside early uploads. It only costs $1 or $2 a month. Thank you especially to these guys who help me keep making videos for all of you.
If you want to, you can follow my Instagram or TikTok, and if you really want to be cool, you can also subscribe to my vlogging channel. There is also a shorts channel if you want to check that out. With that all said, I want to give those of you who watched this full video a massive thank you, and I'll see you next time. Seed Butter out.